So our first speaker is Sister Saarah Bokhari, who is a student of international politics and a presenter for Safir TV. If I could have Sister Saarah Bokhari to the podium, please.
Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum. Across many religions, traditions, and cultures, and across many centuries, the concept of chastity and modesty has played a vital role within our societies. Whether that's in Christianity, Judaism, Islam, whether that's in the southeastern continent, whether that's in countries such as Japan, whether that's even in the West only 100 years ago, modesty and chastity has played a vital role in maintaining the progression of our societies. Modesty and chastity is in direct correlation to concepts such as purity, such as honor, such as striving, such as morality, such as honoring the self and honoring the people around you, honoring your relationship with God. Today in the 21st century, we find ourselves living in a society that is ever-changing, with moral principles that are evolving, and in many ways a society that has distinguished itself from the role of religion in terms of progression. Thus we find ourselves today as British Muslims, as Muslims living in the West, as Muslims who are raised in the Western generation, which differs from perhaps our parents and our grandparents' generations. We find ourselves often having an identity crisis. We find ourselves that we are in a new era. We're in a society that is geared towards globalization. We're in a society with the eruption of social media. We're in a society that has literally made equal the roles of the female and the male. We're in a society with the rise of issues such as feminism. And all of these today leave a confusion amongst us as British Muslims. Where does the role of chastity and modesty play within our lives? What is the role of chastity and modesty? How do we interpret what we were taught from 1400 years ago, from the role models who taught us how to live our lives today? How do we translate that into the lives that we're living today? It's not the same society anymore. It's not a society where we can walk out as women implementing hijab, covered from head to toe, protected by our men. We're in a society where intergender relationships are important, but there's a limit to everything. Islam has an answer. Islam is a moral absolute religion, whereas the society we're living in is ever-changing. And within this society, we must find our own positions. We must be proud of our positions, and we must manifest our physical understanding of modesty based on a spiritual foundation that we lay. I want to argue that much of the confusion regarding chastity and modesty today is because many definitions arise of these topics. Many questions are raised. Many people have different interpretations of these words. As a result, many people implement these words differently. One person's understanding of modesty is not another person's understanding of modesty. The male's understanding of modesty is not equal to the female's understanding of modesty, but we all have a role to play, and we're all responsible. Modesty is a foundation, in the sense that Imam Ali alayhi salam says that chastity is the sense of honor of a human being. It comes down to the sense of honor. And therefore, today, I want to discuss some of these issues. But just to make a crucial point before we go into the actual topic, many scholars argue that the difference between the animal kingdom and the humankind is the fact that we have modesty. And we have this innate nature of being shy. We have this innate nature of having shame in regards to what we do as human beings. Whereas the animal kingdom will go out not being clothed, will put their acts in public for their peers, they'll probably be with each other. They don't mind that kind of stuff. Us as humans, we have this nature where we must be covered. Even the most people who have the least shame understand the need that everybody must be covered. But that physical aspect of modesty is just one part of it. In social media today, you'll scroll through your Twitter feed, you'll look at Instagram, you'll look at Facebook, you'll see many traditions regarding modesty. I think I see one at least every day. Modesty is the adornment of a believer. Shyness is the beauty of a female. Without modesty, there is no faith. But my question to you is that when we're seeing this generic proposal of what modesty should be, have we actually sat down and dissected the meaning of this issue in our day-to-day lives? Are we implementing it in the way that we should implement? Because for the imam, the sixth imam, to turn around and say that without any modesty there is no faith, it shows you the level of importance that this topic has within our day-to-day lives. It in essence makes or breaks us. And in this speech, I want to explain why. Firstly, I want to discuss the Islamic understanding of these topics in comparison to other faiths. Secondly, the spiritual and the physical aspects of it, because indeed modesty is not just the hijab, as some people have limited it to, the physical hijab. Thirdly, how do we implement it in a society that is ever-changing and in the societies that we're living in today? And lastly, what are the consequences of not implementing it? And how does that affect us today? What issues have arisen as a result of not implementing modesty in the way that we should have? And why is it, and how does this tie in with Project Zainab, who are launching their project today? So firstly, the Islamic understanding of chastity. Chastity in any Abrahamic religion means purity, maintaining the sense of the purity of the self, because we were all created as human beings in a pure state. In the Quran it says, from him we come and to him we shall return, because Allah wishes you to return to him in the pure state that he created you. This modesty is only a means to reach Allah in that pure state that we were created. Chastity in the Abrahamic faith differs from chastity in Islam. In Christianity, chastity has been limited to just the physical aspect of chastity, maintaining your physical purity before marriage, maintaining the sanctity of marriage. Whereas in Islam, Imam Ali alayhi salam says that chastity is the honor of a human being. Chastity lifts a human being above the physical realm. Chastity gives a person shame. It gives a person honor in the eyes of Allah. And this is why chastity is accomplished, this sense of purity of the self is accomplished through modesty. So the question now is, what is modesty? If I were to ask each and every one of you in your lives today, do you adopt modesty? And how do you adopt it? Are you conscious of your modesty? Or are you willing to actually give it some more thought, as we all should? Modesty can be broken up into various aspects. Firstly, what we must understand is that it's not a dress sense. Modesty, a part of modesty, is dress. A part of modesty is a conduct that you have with another human being. A part of modesty is your speech, the eloquence with which you speak, the way in which you speak to a fellow human being. Modesty can also be broken up into the spiritual and the physical aspects. We as human beings are souls with bodies. We as human beings are not just a physical element. We are a spiritual element with a physical element. And to return to Allah is having the perfect balance between the two. And lastly, modesty is a system between the male and the female, between a female and a female, between a human and another human. Modesty is also broken up into three other things. Modesty is shyness. Everyone says that modesty is shyness. We all hear Lady Fatima's hadith that shyness is the beauty of a female. But what does this shyness mean? Does it mean that I must hide myself from the world? Does it mean that I mustn't talk to the opposite gender? Not at all, because we're living in a society where we must. Shyness can be broken up into three aspects. Number one is the shyness with yourself. And this is one of the most crucial points regarding modesty that I want to emphasize today. Shyness with the self is that when you're alone with yourself, you're not caught doing things that you wouldn't be doing in public. Shyness with other people is that when you have the respect for yourself, you know how to manifest that in a way that it turns into respect for another human being. Therefore, today we find on social media apps, for example, we find opposite genders thinking it okay to make certain comments regarding the other person's looks, for example, making compliments to another. These aspects of our shyness are being broken down because these veils in society are broken down. When there's respect, there's always boundaries. And when there's boundaries, there's respect. Hence why, without sounding cliche, but if you look at the example of a royal family, if you look at the example of a king, there's always barriers between the king. You wouldn't walk into a king's palace and start touching his clothes and his food and taking what you want, because there's that level of respect between you and that person in a position of authority. In Islam, Islam gives that respect to each and every one of us. Islam gives us the respect within ourselves. Islam gives us the respect to another human being, and most importantly, that respect belongs to our Creator. Hence they say, the third part of shyness, in that modesty, is with your Creator. They say never be seen in a place, in a public place, where you wouldn't be, in the private place where you wouldn't be seen in the public. If a grand Ayatollah from Najaf right now was sitting next to you and said, give me your phone, would you be pleased to show him the things that are on your phone? Would you be happy to say that? And that is simply a creation of Allah. It's simply a person who is someone with an esteemed position. But imagine the one who created you. And thus they say modesty and chastity, another definition of it, can be understood from Dua Arafat. When Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he says that with the eyes that you gave me, and the tongue that you gave me, and the ears that you gave me, with all these gifts that you've given me as a creator, these same gifts I use and I disobey you. Who are we? Who am I to disobey you with the gifts that you've given me? And with this chastity, modesty is a veil. It's an inner veil before it is a physical veil. The physical veil is simply a manifestation of the understanding of that spiritual veil. And that spiritual veil is a covering over each of your senses. Your tongue is gifted from Allah. And to keep that loyalty, it's almost like an exclusive relationship between you and God. When you're in a relationship with a person, you expect that person to belong to you and you only. You expect that the words that you say to belong to only that person. Or the loyalty you have to each other is only to each other. And in the same way, Allah wishes us to have that loyalty to Him. When He gives you your eyes, you only use it in a way that is to honor Him. And when He gives you your tongue, you only use it in a way that is honorable. You don't use it in a way that is obscene. This all comes under the barrier of modesty. And we so often mistake it and limit it to this physical realm. Whereas the next point I want to make, what is the difference between the spirituality and the physical realms of modesty? Everything in religion has a spiritual and a physical aspect. The physical aspect of everything is simply a manifestation of what happens in that spiritual realm. We were created as souls before we were put into this world as bodies, as a soul-body connection. For example, when you look at prayer and you look at Hajj, these are physical actions. If you didn't have any understanding behind that prayer, it would simply be you going up and down about 4 times, 5 times a day. What would be the purpose behind that prayer? But the purpose behind that prayer is a spiritual understanding that you have within yourself. You understand that that prayer is a means for you to connect to your Creator. It's almost, again, it's a sense of loyalty to your Creator. Whereas when that goes, that spiritual understanding goes, there's very little purpose and substance to that prayer. And in the same way, chastity and modesty is exactly the same thing. To maintain that purity, there's a path that we must take. And that modesty is a veil kept within ourselves. When you are 14 years old, and for example, it's the first time you ever listened to music, knowing that it was wrong. Everyone has these moments in their life. Remember that first time you snuck into your room and you did something, and you knew that, oh my God, if my parents see me, they're going to kill me today. That you turn around and you're just like, okay, you know what, I'm doing this. That guilty conscience is within you. 5 years down the line, constantly repeating this. Say you're listening to music every single day. You become desensitized to it. And in the same way, our spiritual understanding of modesty is completely gone the moment we start making it acceptable. And each one of these barriers deteriorates. They say between us and Allah, there's 70,000 veils and barriers. That barrier between us and the Creator is so we maintain that level of respect. We understand that He is a deity, He's above us. And in the same way, we have to keep these social barriers. We have to keep the modesty of the physical veil. And when that foundation is there, then the physical veil is much easier to be implemented. It's much easier to be manifested. But we've got to a point now where we can't just point to someone who's not observing hijab in the right way and say, why aren't you doing this? Why are you dressed like this? Why are you walking out with makeup? Why aren't you lowering your gaze? There's many reasons that are the causes behind this. And the cause behind this is a lack of understanding that we're encouraging amongst ourselves. Modesty is a system between the male and the female, as I mentioned. Without the female doing her part, the male will not do his part. And when there's an imbalance, it causes an imbalance within the individual, within the family structure, within the society, within the community. Modesty is literally that foundation towards building a society that is working towards Allah and the path of purification. It aims to keep us purified so that when you return to your God, you don't have to go through that reckoning of the grave. Your morality is dependent upon your sense of modesty. As your veils of modesty deteriorate, so do your morals deteriorate. And as your morals deteriorate, as Rasulullah says, I came to perfect the morals, then there is no faith. And this is exactly the meaning of the 6th Imam's hadith. Without modesty, there is no faith, because that modesty is the key to faith. And lastly, or thirdly, how do we implement it in the society that we're in today? We know that social media has been one of the biggest reasons as to why these boundaries have broken. I used to speak to my grandmother when I was younger, and she used to tell me, you know, when you go to university, make sure you keep these morals, because right now you have them, when you're older it'll be different. She used to tell me, and this is one brief story I'm going to tell you, but one day she sits me down and she's like, you know when a man stares at you or looks at you in the face, you turn away. You don't look back. You have that social veil. And I was like, what do you mean? I was 6 or 7. I didn't understand. That day I walked to the shops. Man, a very old man, bless him. He looks at me, just smiles and lets me through. And I quickly just looked away. I was like, oh my God, I can't look, it's haram. Later I went home and I told my grandmother, I was like, look, this is what I did. And she was like, gave me the biggest bar of chocolate. And she was like, the reason you do this is because it's your haya, it's your modesty. And growing up, we need to learn how to teach our younger generations this. You have to understand that when your modesty deteriorates, it affects the 5 people around you also. It will affect your children in the future. It will affect your marital relationships in the future. It will affect your relationships with the outside community. It will affect your reputation. And all in all, it begins to affect society. It has a knock-on effect. When people prominent within the community are doing things that are compromising their modesty, it has a knock-on effect to everybody else who is watching those individuals. And thus, each and every one of us are responsible to maintain that modesty. And lastly, what are the consequences of not implementing that modesty? The consequences are exactly why Project Zainab has started. When we look at issues such as zina that's happening, when you look at issues such as marital breakups, when you look at domestic violence, when you look at social media issues, you look at intergender relationships, you see premarital relationships, this is all as a result of the lack of chastity and modesty within our society. It says in the Quran in Surah Nur, tell the believing people, tell them to lower their gaze, tell them to protect their private parts. And the next part it says, because this is purer for them. The aim of life is that purification of the self. The aim of life is to strive in that purification. And without that purification, there is no purpose. That purification is what those 14 infallibles, they were created pure for a reason, so we take their example. And it's now down to us as individuals to make sure that when these issues are happening, we can't turn around and start condemning people now. We can't turn around and say you're wrong for ending up in the situation. It's your fault that your marriage broke up. It's your fault that your husband found things on your phone that he shouldn't have. It's your fault that you've got things on your Instagram that you really shouldn't be doing and you know it. These things are all consequences of us not having that awareness. So how exactly do we implement this modesty? It's a God consciousness first and foremost. It's understanding that we all have the responsibility. What you do in your private room when it's you and your phone. What you do when you're out in your group of friends and you're making comments that you know that aren't appropriate comments. When you have that simple gaze that you should not be making. Each one of these affects our purity as a human being, has consequences that none of us could even understand the depth of those consequences that will have on our futures. And therefore we have to understand that the time to act is now. It doesn't matter what extent of how your modesty is compromised in your own life. Nobody is perfect. We all have a battle to go through. We all have those things that we shouldn't be doing in our private life. We all have that relationship with Allah that we need to work on. It's like Imam Hussein says, we don't want to be of those people who abuse the very gifts that our Creator gave us. And therefore, the God consciousness is the first step. The second step is analyze yourself. Ask yourself, what are the issues? I'm sure each and every one of us in our minds today have something that's going through our mind that we need to work on. We need to understand we're here for each other. We're not here to condemn one another. If a girl hasn't got a perfect hijab, it's actually down to the brothers to sit there and help her do it. It's not to judge the female and say, she's emanating this air of disrespect and therefore I can disrespect her. In Islam, justice is prevalent. The Imams weren't only just to the people who are just, they were just to the people who are unjust. For a person who doesn't understand hijab in the way they should, it's not for a male to turn around and say, you know what, I'm going to disrespect you now as a result. I'm going to abuse this image that you've given because you've given the image and therefore you deserve it. It's for us to understand each other's flaws, work with each other's flaws, and work together towards a more progressive society. And in that, I'd like to say thank you very much to Project Zainab, and I really, really pray that these issues are counteracted in the way that they should be, and each and every one of us give them the support that they deserve, because they've done something that none of us up to this point have had the bravery to do. And therefore, I wish them all success, and thank you all for listening. Wa alaikum salam.